Welcome back. You're watching Global Today here. We were just conversing on the current visit of President Macron in Congo. He began in Gabon, of course, with the Central Africa tour, now culminating at, of course, that particular conference that we had there in Congo. We're holding court with the President of Congo, where we have President Tshisekedi asking or urging French President Emmanuel Macron to pursue international sanctions against Rwanda for its alleged military support to the M23 rebellion. And Macron said he was waiting for the end of several ongoing peace negotiations efforts before considering such a step. But he vowed that France will be faithful to its role as an unwavering ally of Congo to defend its integrity and sovereignty. Eastern Congo has been mired, of course, in conflict for decades with armed groups, and this is what we're discussing here with Professor Kagwanja. We have also Dr. Hassan Kaneje, Ahmed Hashi, and Professor Noami Damba. Let me just cross over to you, Kagwanja, with those statements and his visit and how they've had also the clammy fingers on Africa.
Again, it is important to put things in context so that we understand why France is behaving the way it is behaving and whether there are things are changing for better, if not for worse. It all begins with Kwame Nkrumah in 1965. He publishes his book called Neocolonialism, the highest stage of imperialism. And the book was inspired by his own personal experience and the experience of his great friend, Sékou Touré. When 1958, France asked its former colonies, under pressure from the UN, to choose to decolonize. Many of the French readers actually cried tears. He was asking Charles de Gaulle, why do you, Papa, why do you want to leave us? They were like the kids who have been told that I'm no longer your father, and they were all in tears. Now, the only exception was Sékou Touré, who said, good riddance. And the hypocrisy of the time, particularly from Paris, was that Sékou Touré was punished. The French, it is said and written, went to that country, stripped it of any element of development, including plucking railways. The joke is made that even ladies went to Pharaoh ladies to ask back for some gifts they had given to the black ladies. And Guinea became an epitome of underdevelopment, not because it was not developed, but because Sékou Touré chose free independence. In other words, you have a currency, you have your own independence, like the rest of the British. So neocolonialism has better been played out in the French colony. I would argue that France is the most successful neo-colonial power on planet Earth. It's the most successful because it has managed to maintain a struggle on its colonies despite the facade of independence. Now, if you look at how it operates, and I think Hanenji has gone into the depth of it, it has a direct military presence in countries with or without the permission of the countries that are there. Economically, it is a currency that is there. And therefore, as I've said, there are more coups in Francophone Africa than in any other part of the world. And why are the coups? Because the coups are there to change people who don't behave. Obviously, the French did not believe in democracy. So what does that mean? France continue to colonize its colonies. And there is no doubt about it. And let's not lie out. The French are my friends. I have very good friends among the French, and they must be listening. I have nothing against the French. I have against the system that they run. They run a system that is the worst in modern history. Now, the Portuguese are the inverse. Whereas Portugal had Angola and Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau and a few others. If you look at the relationship between Portugal and Angola, actually the colonizing power, quote unquote, would be Brazil. Because when the Angolans want to go to the metropole, they go to Brazil, Sao Paulo and Brasilia, and so on. So the weaker the country, the more held it had. But for for Portugal, it was colonized for at a certain time by Spain. Therefore, it lost control of its colonies, and therefore they emerged the poorest, followed now by the French, who are poorer. Is France moving towards liberating or giving more freedom, economic and otherwise, to its territory? No. In fact, in its negotiation with China, it is insisting on what is called tripartite arrangement. And we have criticized China and want it. The moment you get into this kind of a tripartite arrangement, that is, a deal is hatched in Paris, then that economic project, like if it's a railway or whatever it is done in conjunction with the France.
Pure.
So China is unwittingly being drawn into the colonial matrix of France. And we are beginning to see European countries like Germany also being drawn into this kind of arrangement in Mali. So you go and you come into Mali. So it is, we are now beginning to get what we call multilateral colonialism, where a number of countries are beginning to colonize French West Africa.
They're grouping together to colonize.
Yes. One is not really praising Britain. I think Britain was beaten because the most violent anti-colonial resistance was in British colonies.
Yes.
From Europe, from Asia, Malaysia and others, to Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe and others.
Yes.
They took arms. So Britain did not graciously give independence.
They were kicked out.
They were kicked out, but they were clever. The Queen was wise and managed to make up by creating the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth has no financial control over former colonies. Not that they have not also engineering coups like in Uganda, bringing Idi Amin and so on. All these things are seen. But the point is, France is not about to let go its colonies. Don't beg France to let go the colonies. The rest of Africa has to speak, has to support French Africa to be free. Correct. Now, the final point is, France, and I say this without fear of contradiction, France is using the African Union to control the rest of Africa. It has controlled the leadership of the African Union for donkey years. And it is, if there is any single investment the French make, is to determine who becomes what in the African Union. So the African Union.
So the debate about the Anglo-Saxons, they have to rotate the leadership.
Yes.
According to now.
The French have violated that, not violated, but have worked against that. And therefore, if there is any multilateral colonialism of France, it is through the African Union. And the African Union itself needs to have the spotlight on it, because it is the perpetuator of the French domination of West Africa.
Can I just add something
to
this?
No. Let me hear from Naomi Dama, then we'll come to you, please. Naomi Dama, first of all, and then we need to also juxtapose our discussion with the M23 and the sentiments from
That's exactly what I want to talk about.
Sure. Naomi Dama.
Duval, Macron does not go to sleep in the evening and wake up thinking about the African child that has not eaten for days. So let's not kid ourselves. And it's time that we wake up and see the truth right in front of us. Ngugi wa Thiong'o said it right, decolonizing the mind. Chunwa Achebe said things fall apart. We need to remember in 1969, Mao Zedong traveled through Africa, and at the end he said Africa was ripe for revolution. And Mao was not calling on African to arm themselves and begin killing each other, but he meant changing our mental, cultural behavior, going back to our cultural behavior, and being able to change our life so that we can resist the kind of thing that Macron is doing. Macron is not coming, as I said, for Africa. Macron is coming for France and continue the French influence and control in Kenya right now. As you can see, our own supermarket, Nakumatt, fall. Who replaced Nakumatt? It's Carrefour. and Carrefour is spreading all over. Total is everywhere. France is looking at 1.3 billion people in Africa. They're looking at that huge market. They're looking at DRC Congo, the BAL, with potential of $24 trillion of mineral resources. Where's it going to come from? So France is knocking the door, ready to influence what is going to happen in the future in the market and everything, and manipulate and continue. France is no country without all its colonies and everything. That's why they're still controlling the central bank of all these countries and the movement of the country. Africa must stand. Africa must stand and make sure that we can be able to control our destiny and make decisions that will affect the rest. We bring in friends when the friends are going to be valuable to Africa, and you can pick up.
Well, just a little bit of context or canvas as to this issue of the French and the British in history. In short, in the diaspora in the United States, there's developed a response to this in the 50s and 40s, something called Afrocentrism, as opposed to European centrism, because that was what people were resisting. For us, in the area of Africa, the major response to French colonialism and the French subject of creating Frenchmen in Africa was through something called negritude. People like Aimé Césaire, Léopold Sédar Senghor, and the response to those through Frantz Fanon and the rest. Negritude suggested that there was some form of Garden of Eden in which Africans were living happily ever after before the colonialists came. Of course, this has been nonsense by, if I can quip that word, by the Frantz Fanon and those who came after him. So this is the canon of the philosophical response to Professor Kagwanja's assertions here about Lusophone and Africans in West Africa and in South Africa. The great Samora Machel used to say, a luta continua. Then he would ask why? Why a luta continua? He would say this because there's no colonialism that was better than the other. The British, we in the areas in which British colonialism existed, tend to believe that our colonialism was a little bit better than the French colonialism. I don't think this is true. Colonialism is colonialism, whatever language that it comes in, French, Portuguese, British, they're all brutal and exploited us. Now, the question then is this debate I've always said between pessimism, Afro-pessimists and Afro-optimists. Our response now, Debal, in the context of what Mr. Macron has been doing in the DRC, is the really blithe, if I can find the proper English word, response of the president of the DRC to speak to the French president, to ask him to make sanctions to his neighbor, his fellow African country, in response to what is happening between them. I mean, it's absurd. It makes him look terrible in front of the French president. I think Mr. Tshisekedi is now delirious about Rwanda. And yesterday, President Kagame said that when he comes to Nairobi, there better be serious discussions about the DRC, or he's not going to come back here again. This was what he said yesterday. So I think that it is very important for us first to exclude the French and exclude anybody else. And in the same vein, the African Union was saying they want African solutions to African problems, that we should be at the table speaking about our problems and discussing them without any reach to the former colonial power. I think it's appalling that the president of the DRC did that. The second thing is that President Kenyatta has been mediating these forces here in Nairobi. His father did the same thing, if people remember.
Yes.
In the 60s, his father mediated between Savimbi, Ronald, the northern Angola guy, I forget his name, Ronaldo something, and the whole problem of Angola was brought here. The whole problem of the DRC was brought here. The whole problem of Congo Brazzaville was brought here. Kenya has a diplomatic history on these things, but we need solutions to these problems. They cannot just be intractable negotiations that keep going on. And Debal, we all know that there's two problems in the DRC and Rwanda. One is the citizenship of the Banyamulinge people. And the other is the FRDLC, this Hutu extremist group in Congo. Those are the two really substantive steak and potato issues that need to be solved. And it takes great courage to try and solve that. And I believe that Mr. Kenyatta should really put his foot down and reject that other foreign people try to enter into these negotiations about the DRC.
So even as we're running up on it, I just wanted to hear from Dr. Kanenje and Kagwanja just briefly. And of course, there's this looming debate on also whether we'll have polls in December in light of what is going on. First of all, as Hashi is putting it, you find it ridiculous as well that we have, visiting president, now you're seeking his favor to try and, punish your neighbor because of the sanctions, go out and enforce, rally the international community. How is it coming across to you?
I don't find it exactly ridiculous. I find it embarrassing. Embarrassing because these are two neighboring countries that are part of the East African Community family.
Yes.
Okay, and here we are now asking outsiders to come and fix our family issues that we have. Now, I do agree with what Hashi has mentioned. Two fundamental issues: the idea of citizenship and incomplete business of the Rwanda-Congo conflict that removed Mobutu in power, and what emerged, from it. It's a legacy of the genocide of 1994, and of course beyond. And two, what Rwanda is claiming, with regard to providing basing for Interahamwe as well as subversive elements, as in these issues to do with citizenship in Eastern DRC has to be addressed. Now, do I think that the French are going to do much? Probably not. France is probably one of the least qualified countries to actually make any form of negative intervention in Rwanda because of the history and its role in 1994 genocide. And they are acutely aware of that kind of history, and so they're very, very going to be reluctant to actually do that. Now, is Rwanda to some extent involved in DRC? Absolutely. Those are conflict dynamics. It demands that you cannot run away from it. Otherwise, where will those people be getting their arms? They are so well trained, they're so well equipped. Now, I do agree in part with Kagame. That does not mean I endorse his actions. Any other talks should be very, very substantive and be able to lay everything to bear. Bring the elephant in the room, bring it out. And if those issues are not discussed, especially between Rwanda and DR Congo, is going to be a challenge. Now, with regard to the elections, right now they don't seem to be a program of actually having elections in December in Congo. In Kivu region, there's a lot of displacement because of the conflict. Any potential escalation is only going to make things worse. That politically, number one, is a convenient excuse not to have elections. But practically, it's also going to mean if you proceed with an election, it's going to disenfranchise a lot of people. And so, what do? Are you still going to proceed with an election that perhaps may not really turn out to be legitimate in terms of giving you legitimacy? Or are you going to ensure that certain arrangements are made so that actually people can return to their stations to be able to vote? Because in the Eastern DRC, there is a lot of displacement. There is no infrastructure to actually be able to hold elections, much less even the rest of Congo, which is already, in a very, very bad shape. And so there are challenges that actually right now, considering all the factors, we may not see an election in December for political, security, as well as practical reasons.
Thank you. Briefly, Dr.
I agree with Dr. Kanenje about the embarrassing situation arising from the question that the request that was made by Sekendi. First, it's ironical because it is South Africa and Kenya that put their foot down in regard to Sekedi's election, and they said that let the system be what it is. Rwanda and France and actually opposed Sekedi rising to power. And I think ever since, Kenya has paid its due, has paid its debt to Rwanda, because of the animosity. We were very close, but now I wouldn't say that we are extremely close as two countries, arising from how we dealt with the Congo. And the fact that the question of the Congo has estranged Rwanda and Burundi, Rwanda and Tanzania, Rwanda and Kenya, should have kind of informed the intervention by William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta before him about the Congo. You are not dealing with a conflict in the Congo, in the Kivus, as we try to do them. International Crisis Group and other groups that assume that they are doing analysis about Africa, deal with the conflict in Goma, in Kivus and all that. That's nonsense. The truth of the matter is that you are dealing with two countries that have histories of interaction, and where the boundaries are irrelevant, and where the problems they are dealing with are common, but they still insist on their own sovereignty. The debate about the mediation in Eastern Congo is not a mediation about Eastern Congo. It's a mediation between Rwanda and DRC and how they see the future of that region collectively. If that is not achieved, then we are wasting our time.
Right.
If you don't mediate Rwanda, then there's a third country you bring into the picture, which is Uganda. Uganda, which has a vision of what it wants to see Rwanda doing in Congo, because it doesn't want Rwanda to be too powerful as to eclipse it, and so on. There is a sibling rivalry between President Yoweri Museveni and his cousin Kagame. So the Bahimas.
Yes, they're the same people.
They are the same people. They have the same thing, but they also have their own internal rivalries, who have long legs and who have shorter legs, and so on. All that is an issue for them. Now, but then the context is right. The coming of Congo into the East African community provided two platforms that are likely to serve within Africa to serve that. One is the East African community as a framework, which is within the line that Hashi and I like talking about, the regional citizenship. So Congo is irrelevant as far as East African community is concerned. It is part of the East African community. Rwanda is irrelevant because we are all carrying the same passport. We are having the same immigration rules, so it's not an issue. Then there is the African Union and its gravitas that it can bring in. So I see France coming in as irrelevant, and that's where Sekedi was just wasting his breath, and possibly if he wrote, he also wasted his ink. About democracy in the Congo, I mean, Sekedi should not assume that when he was elected, all the conditions were right. No, countries must hold elections when they are supposed to hold elections. Then democracy is work in progress. The coming election is not going to be perfect. It's going to have some problems, and we all acknowledge his election had its problems. And the coming other election after that is going to have some problems. So let's not assume that he's going to stop because he's the one who determines when conditions are right for election. And that means he overstay in power, and that is not going to set a good precedence in terms of democratic practice. Right,
thank you. We need to wind up on that unless there is anything that you want to contribute. I think we've belabored or we've beaten it to the ground. But there is this very interesting editorial cartoon that now will act as a segue to our next discussion, and this is all about Nigeria. And remember also Hashi was talking about the president of Congo, not Congo, the president of Cameroon as well. But here we have Buhari, who is trying to pass this particular drip to Tinubu as it is right now, talking about our aging leaders here who tend to hang even by the fingernails on power. But talking about Nigeria right now, we have Festus Okoye, who is the INEC National Commissioner for Information, who spoke on Monday while addressing the members of the PDP who protested at the Commission's headquarters in Abuja. The cable had reported how the protesters led by Atiku Abubakar, the PDP standard bearer, marched to INEC's office to protest the results of election won by Bola Tinubu of All Progress Congress, APC. The protesters, who were dressed in black, started their demonstrations from Legacy House, causing heavy traffic congestion around the Maitama axis. Okoye said the protest letter received from PDP will be transmitted to Mahmoud Yakubu, INEC national chairman, adding that the grievances will be addressed. And we just want to discuss the Nigerian elections right now. That pretty much is a parallel to our elections.
Yeah.
They're heading to the Supreme Court as it stands
Yeah.
right now. If that is the latest development that I'm aware. If anything has changed, maybe you can tell us. But briefly, could you just comment on the cartoon? Then you.
Well, there is a concept called.
I think it is.
No, it's my turn.
It is his turn.
Oh,
yes, it
just
is.
spoke. Sorry.
Mm. Yes.
I thought it was my turn.
It is Dr. Kanenje's turn.
Yes.
And then my turn.
No,
First-
it's going. It's my turn.
Yeah.
Okay, I rule.
Okay, let's continue. Dr. Kanenje is on, please.
Yeah. First of all, it's blasphemous to present the senior citizens in this way. You know, we're respecting or we're disrespecting our elders.
Come on.
Are we disrespecting?
I think it's a beautiful.
Who is
one.
the president? We saw him with a walker.
I think
going
it's
for these
a. I think
summits
it's
as
a
well.
beautiful cartoon.
You know,
Who is puffing and huffing and is really panting there,
you know,
Buhari?
Tinubu is only 70 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, he's only 70 years old.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Joe Biden is much older
Yeah.
than Tinubu. And Hastings Kamuzu Banda was still running for re-election in 1996.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if you remember that. Yeah, there is going to be an appeal, and I think within 3 weeks, that's the time frame with Nigeria. My guess, it is probably not going to amount to really nothing much. Now, there were certain questionable practices, but I do not think the opposition in Nigeria lost because the other party was pretty much, stealing the election. It's much less what happened there, what happened to Kenya in 1990 or 1997. And because there is no 50+1, the president ended up right now, the Tinubu, I think he got around 39% or 37%, something like that. Yeah, because they both Obi and Atiku
Divided the
Abubakar,
vote.
who's been running for president, probably much like our own, Tinga, here so many times, they could not reach an agreement to actually combine, because their combined votes
Would win.
contributed more than 60% of the votes. And so that's not going to change the dynamic even in the court, and we're going to look at the numbers and realize, it's probably not going to amount to much. But also fundamentally, the turnout in Nigeria was 29%.
It's terrible.
29%. How do you really explain that? It is so low. So it looks like either Nigerians have become apathetic in the political system, or simply they have lost the sense of civic responsibility and citizenship
tired.
to ensure that they actually need to be able to play a role to be able to do that. But I think the result is still going to be the same in the court. I don't think there's going to be a repeat in the election in Nigeria, and we have to be prepared to deal with Tinubu and APC's reign for the next 10 years.
All right, so they're saying that
10 or 8.
Peter Obi was the most popular candidate, that he was resonating with the young people. And now they're out in the streets protesting that something went awry with these particular elections. It was stolen. Do you stand with that particular view, or what has been put on the
I don't think
public gallery?
I don't think it was stolen. It is Nigerians need to sit back and take the lessons
Yes.
that we as Kenyans took from our experience in 1992 to 2002.
Yes.
The lesson was Daniel Moi was re-elected in 1992 with slightly below that 36%. It was 29%. Yeah, 29%.
Yeah.
And Kenneth Matiba, both combined with that Jaramogi Odinga, together with that Kibaki, would have given over 70%.
Correct.
Almost. They took that lesson. Then in 1997, there were efforts now of individual leaders now to go their own way. And what happened? We got Moi getting 34%. 34%.
34%.
Yes, he got a bigger chunk, and therefore was able to again be re-elected. So 2 lessons we learned. One, you have to get a majority, absolute majority, which is 50% plus 1. And we needed to put that into the constitution in one way or another, so that whoever wins absolutely, not through that. 2, that the opposition can never win unless it's a coalition. So those 2 ideas were born. The idea of a coalition government or a coalition, party, as whether it is in government or out of government, and that's where, if we look from that time on, Raila called ODM as a coalition. Then finally there was a CORD. After CORD there is NASA, and now there is Azimio. All these are a product of our experience. Nigeria need to learn that lesson about that, because if you take Peter Obi and Atiku's figures, they are 2/3.
Yes.
They would have defeated Tinubu hands down. But Tinubu comes from the ruling party, and incumbents don't normally lose. But he had a stretch. It was not just like that. He had a stretch given the figures that are there. Finally, I think for the lessons that we are running, and we compare Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. These are what we call the regional powers. And it is a British scholar, Nick Cheesman, who has toyed with the idea of hegemonic instability. So what is happening in Nigeria is likely to have impact on us as Kenyans. It's going to have on Africa as a whole, because Nigeria is a pivotal state. It's an anchor state in many ways. The good news is that the fact that Nigerians are fighting their wars constitutionally means that the edge of a coup d'etat is over. Yeah. Because it is coups in Nigeria that had domino effect in the whole of West Africa. After a coup in Nigeria, you get a coup in Ghana, you get a coup in any country in West Africa. Now, it's not about coups, it's about challenging your discontents in the courts, and that is positive. Finally, one need to say that Nigerians need to learn the lesson that if you have lost an election, you have to accept that you have lost an election. And then challenges in court if there are discrepancies. But if the moment the court pronounces itself, Nigeria, don't go the way of Kenya. Kenya is beginning to behave badly. And the elders in Kenya, despite the age, are not behaving well. And I'm going to make a comment on that as we finish.
Well, the teacher of
we need to hear that comment.
Mr. Cheeseman's teacher was called Eric Hobsbawm. The great Eric Hobsbawm, who wrote his magisterial work. It's a trilogy. The last one was the Age of Extremes. And you know, after the fall of the wall in the Berlin, people in Africa believed that there was going to be a tremendous change, and in fact there was tremendous change, because the Cold War was at our grips, and it thawed. And that's how Daniel Moi left power, and that's how Mobutu left power, and that's how South Africa became independent. There's a huge impact on Africa and on our politics. But the political class in Africa now has figured out some monkey business, and it's called electoral commissions. So the debate of pluralism, democracy, and the rule of law has been really filtered down to how do you choose, and we in Kenya are also facing this same problem, is that if we get the right electoral commission, if you get the right people to decide who is going to win an election, you win an election. Doesn't matter what the people said, because you're going to get something from the people, given the ethnic divide that people have. So for an example, in Nigeria, I want to disagree with my learned senior. I don't think that there was a free and fair elections in Nigeria. I think that the African Union under the leadership of our president, former president Uhuru Kenyatta, gave it a clean bill of health. But you know what he said? Go to court. I do agree with the latter point that my senior learned has said, that going to court and solving your issues through legal problems actually is a stage higher in the civilizational scale than doing a coup d'etat, which is the worst thing to do. So we are learning our low standards in Africa. We refuse to leave these low standards, and we hopefully are going to get to medium standards in the foreseeable future. Debal, you know that we all have our own problems here with the Electoral Commission. They're going to appoint members of the Electoral Commission, and those people are going to be extremely wealthy and extremely powerful right after an election. Every electoral commissioner in this country, right after an election, builds a house in Karen. I'm not kidding. You can go check it. Last point, Debal, is Debal, at the end of the day, I think it's really important for us to be able to understand that at the end of the day, when all is said and done, that we cannot continue doing this vicious cycle over and over and over again. Nigeria is the giant of this continent. Out of every, I like saying this, out of every 5 Africans, 1 is Nigeria. They say the population is about 200 million. I suspect it's about 3. Because they haven't counted the people. I think the excellent point raised by my colleague about apathy is the Nigerians have tried everything. And now that democratic systems have come and they're not really fixing the problems of infrastructure, of poverty, of oil, of political leadership, and still producing these fellows who are 70 years old, there's no younger representation. I think that it can be ably be called the sick man in Africa, because if Nigeria rises, if Egypt rises, if Kenya rises, if South Africa rises, these are the linchpins for the regions.
Right.
And they're the ones who are going to bring the continent together.
I'll be remiss if we don't discuss. We've heard from you, Professor.
No,
Midamba is
no, you
next.
didn't
On
hear.
this? No, we've heard from him.
You're just recovering.
That's right. Okay,
It doesn't mean that in my mind. Okay.
No,
It's
Debal.
because I'm just saying we're time poor and we need to discuss something.
Let's
very
have the
critical.
last word.
No, Debal, we don't want consider you to be part of those cartoons. Otherwise, we'll be
So we're coming with a drip here.
we'll be in a lot of trouble. Dubal, the Goodluck Jonathan, former president of Nigeria, and I spent a considerable time last year. He is a chancellor of one of the university. I was a keynote speaker at the graduation. And, we spent time thinking about the process and also the governance, capacity to govern ourselves as Africa. And, in this election, the youth, the young people in Nigeria had a lot of hope. 11 million new voters came. And at the end, only 29% voted. And so the issue then is business as usual, nothing changed. And it was the same to watch Nigerian election process, watch the teens where people were stuffing vote, and Nigeria's #1 economy in the continent of Africa. And so it does not reflect good on us. So what Jonathan and I came up with is that we really need a bureau managed by AU of the top recruits of Africans who are fundamentally equipped. They understand election, they are committed for the continent, and then have these people ready and available to manage every election in the continent of Africa. Because each of the institutions, the nation states, have failed. It does not work. Whether it's Kedia, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's another country, it's the same. So we are suffering because of our election process, and we are suffering because of capacity to manage ourselves. So instead of bringing Europeans and Americans and everybody to do it, we need to do it ourselves. And this team here can be part of that team.
Very well said.
All right. Thank you, Midamba. We are stopped for time, but I wanted just to bring out this. I think it's very pivotal for us to discuss it briefly. And if my director may just pick up this from the East African, where they're talking about Kenya's deputy president to run foreign policy rule in new shift. This has drawn a lot of reaction. And just to read a snippet there, Kenya deputy president to run foreign policy rule in new shift. This is all about diplomacy. It says Kenya's deputy president Rigathi Gachagua could now be the face of the country's top foreign policy dealings after taking charge of cross-cutting meetings with foreign envoys. We just saw the ties between him and also Japan, that he was sealing business angle as well, with foreign envoys eating the lunch of substantive foreign affairs cabinet secretary. An official memo sent to diplomatic missions and known as not verbal. Verbal. Yeah, you help me.
Not
verbal, that diplomacy language, on Wednesday instructed embassies to consider working directly with specified government agencies as long as they copy in the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs in correspondences. And the East African understands the change is as a result of numerous complaints from diplomats in Nairobi about bureaucratic delays on approving meetings by the ministry, now headed by Dr. Alfred Muto. It means Deputy President Gachagua will handle meetings where embassies want to engage more than one government department at once. They're not saying. And he says that requests of meetings of cross-cutting nature and that which involves more than one ministry, it is advised that such requests should be made through the office of the Deputy President for coordination purposes. The letter shared with all foreign missions accredited to Nairobi indicated. Now, what about the Vienna Convention? The note appends Kenya's age-old tradition of handling foreign policy affairs through the ministry in charge of foreign affairs, something which is also the presumption in the Vienna Convention of 1961, to which Kenya is a signatory. Let me just leave it at that. There was reaction from the former High Commissioner, British High Commissioner to Kenya, and he actually commented on this on Twitter. This is Christian Tanner, and he said, having served as the UK ambassador to Kenya from 2012 to 2015, I shudder at the drastic and somewhat ill-advised shift of foreign policy by the current Kenya administration. It goes on to say that according to the recent directive, foreign missions in Kenya will now engage directly with the Kenyan ministry and state agencies without going through excuse me, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is bound to breed a lot of underhand deals by senior individuals. It goes on to say, just also reflecting on the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, places the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the only important organ in charge of operations of foreign missions. Using the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is critical and creates a centralized and structured engagement between Kenya and their partners. But now, it will be free for all. Some corrupt ministers will be pursuing own deals as opposed to partnerships that benefit great people of Kenya. It goes on to say the president must reconsider this shift in foreign policy before it's too late. Meanwhile, this is my personal opinion. That is a Christian Tanner. We considering also, I know we don't have much time to talk about this.
I know something about this.
You and the Minister of Foreign Affairs as
he's first of all, he's absolutely right. But we don't need his lecture. Nobody lectures the British Foreign Ministry. We know that this is a terrible policy option. My senior learned, who is even better than me at foreign relations, I must say, absolutely wrong for what is happening is to move. You see, the Deputy President doesn't have any functions. Those functions are being given to him as the President as is his pleasure. I think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the top 3 most important cabinet secretary we have in this country. And for the last, since the second term of President Uhuru Kenyatta, it's been downgraded to a ministry of some kind. The resources is not there. In fact, even that building, people should move it. I think he's absolutely right. This thing should never go to the Deputy President's office. He has more important issues to deal with inside this country that has been given by the President. The foreign affairs issues should stay in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
All right. Let's hear from Naomi Daba briefly as we also give our headline thoughts.
Duval, under President Kenyatta, Mina Mohammed, we are one of the few countries in Africa with a written foreign policy. That was a really good development, and those of us played a very active role in bringing diaspora policy together. Jonathan and I, was talking that particular item where we bring Kenya diaspora as a focal point and a pillar. Is the only one in Africa.
I know.
And it's an example. So you don't just bring anybody from the village in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and say, please run it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs are professional people. They need a professional leader.
Absolutely.
They need to be well-funded, well-respected,
Absolutely.
such that we can continue to develop our, particular at this point, where the world is having crisis. We need to be having very solid people. And I can't see how the deputy president is going to be able to manage that and have everybody else.
Right, thank you.
It's a wrong direction.
It's a wrong direction. I think we can dedicate some more time next
we
week
need
to delve into this.
Yes,
but let's just hear briefly your
need-
comments, Dr. Kanenje.
Well, foreign policy decision-making requires very sober, calculated, rational understanding of national interest as well as national security, and whose competence falls within certain parameters of government. Not everybody and every agency in government tends to have that type of competence. I'm sure perhaps those who've made these moves are also aware of that, and I'm hopeful that they've put in place frameworks and mechanisms to ensure that national security and national interest of the country is not compromised.
All right.
I think it's also important to put things in context. The chaos did not start with the Kenya Kwanza Ruto government. The chaos has been there, brought by certain factors. From 1963 all the way up to 1978, it's a deputy president who was the face of diplomacy in Kenya. Moi attended all the meetings because Kenyatta couldn't attend meetings. So as far as it was concerned, foreign policy was in the hands of the Ministry of Home Affairs, which was run by the deputy president that time. And this was based on the principle, and this is the issue about diplomacy, because sometimes we can be emotional about things we think we know, but we don't. The foreign policy is the docket of the president.
Yes.
The moment the president steps out of the country and gets out, he becomes the foreign affairs chief.
De facto.
And the minister, the minister and the ambassador drop the flag. So it's he runs the flag of that country in whichever other country he is, whether it's a UN or so on. So that is important to note. So that's the docket. But it is delegated to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Now, in this country, we have another problem. We have about 3 ministers who are playing the role of foreign affairs. Also, the first is the de facto minister.
Right.
And Amina Mohammed,
I just wanted to give you a cursory remark because we'll dedicate, we're really strapped for time.
Yes. But let me
just give a cursory remark.
But let me then
we can
finish
pick up
that
with the topic next week.
Yes. So we have the Minister of East Africa, which is foreign. We have the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and we have the Minister of Trade.
Yes.
All these are in conflict.
Thank you.
They need to be harmonized.
Thank you. Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
We'll dedicate more time next week and even invite maybe a former diplomat to give us an insight on this particular... the minister himself. Let's hear your closing remarks, 20 seconds. Dr. Kanenje, 20 seconds.
I can't help but talk about the rains that are raining. I've studied in parts of the country. I want to encourage my fellow people, especially from the North Rift and West, who do farming, to make use of it. And we know that Nairobi is still dry, but the country has been facing tough times when it comes to food security. And so perhaps starting early is going to be helpful to ensure that we caution ourselves in the later months of the year.
Thank you. All right.
I think the clock is ticking towards the deadline of Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta, and the group about the protests. Something needs to be said very quickly. First, Ruto was elected as per our constitution, and therefore you can only get him out of power as per our constitution. Let's not use the opposition or weaponize the opposition for coups.
Thank you.
It's not helpful.
Right, leave it at that. 20 seconds.
People of Kenya are in a desperate situation. The cost of eating food and living and jobs is in the bullocks. The government has to do something about this situation in Kenya. Poor people and the entire population are suffering. How we're going to live in this country under this economic situation, is just unbelievable.
Thank you. Thank you. No, Madam.
During recent time, we have focused on 2 issues. One was stepping out corruption in our country, bringing Kenya together. This administration must focus their eye full-time, 24/7 on those 2 issues without anything.
Thank you. Thank you, Naomi Damba. We really do appreciate her this morning, Dr. Kanenje. And Professor Kagonja, thank you so much for that cogent, immersive discussion we've had. So next week we'll pick up on the foreign policy shift and, of course, delve deeper on that. What does it really portend for other